Jesus was here. Did you know that?
That's right.
Not here, but the places we're going to look at tonight will be some places Jesus was here. This is kind of a continuation of the things we looked at last week, coming up to the Passover, which Passover begins next Friday, I believe. The next Friday actually is Passover, and then Saturday will be the first day of unleavened bread. And we were talking about, and we're going to touch on a little bit tonight, it just so happens that that first day of unleavened bread, which is a special Sabbath, will also be the weekly Sabbath. So I'm not exactly sure what they do in that when it falls that way, but it'd be interesting to know. But anyway, so yeah, our Seder will come at an appropriate time. It'll be actually during Passover, which the reason we emphasize that and really talk about it all is because it was during Passover that Jesus was crucified and his resurrection. It happened during that 7-day or Passover and then 7-day Feast of Unleavened Bread. So, all right, let's go to Jerusalem and we'll see some places where Jesus was.
A lot of travel. That's right. Don't even hear it.
Travel without leaving home. There we go. All right. You probably recognize this. This is what they call the Wailing Wall. This wall right here is kind of a division wall. It's not always there. Most of the time, all of this big, it's a large area, big open court going down to the wall area where the Jews go and pray. Now, back over this way, there's pretty much a permanent separation, a place for the women. The women go on one side and the men go on the other side. Men and women don't pray together. They're segregated in their, Jewish prayers. But then that's kind of something they've always done. Even in the ancient synagogues, there were separate places where the women sat and then separate places where the men sat. As you can see, here's a Jewish woman sitting outside this wall, and she's, reading her book of prayers and probably praying and things.
What's the purpose of them going to the wall?
This being part of the Temple Mount structure that Herod built, this is as close as the Jews can get to any remnants of where the temple was, because the actual temple would have been like right up there, so where they come and congregate down here to pray, they're about as close as they can get to any structure that was there when the temple was there, and as close to where the temple was. So that's why and this kind of became a tradition in 1967 when the Israeli military took back Jerusalem, and this was one of the first places they were able to go. I'm sure you've seen the photograph. There's a famous photograph of 3 Israeli soldiers and a rabbi, and he's here at this location. I think I've got this right. And he's blowing the shofar, So anyway, it became a significant place, and still remains to this day. And that's why they go there. That's why this particular, it's called, the Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall is what they call it, because it's the western wall of the Temple Mount. And all of this stone structure, probably up to about this level, all of this would have been original structure built by Herod. It would have been Herod the Great. This was all started, the Temple Mount structure was started in, I think, I want to say around 2830 BC, and continued maybe a little later than that. But it was started before Jesus' birth, and it kind of still in construction during Jesus' lifetime. Pretty much finished and functional and everything. But so anyway, Herod the Great, who was really, for as evil as Herod the Great was, and I mean he was an evil tyrant, but for as evil as he was a tremendous builder. I mean, he built some amazing structures all over Israel and the Levant and that whole area, the coast there, and a lot of just fabulous places that he built and had constructed. I don't know how he paid for it all, but anyway, he did. Built some amazing things. So that's the significance of this, the Western Wall. And if you ever go there, Gentiles can go there. You just have to, wear some kind of head covering. Either wear one of the yarmulke, they'll give you one there, or something, and you don't have to be a Hasidic Jew, or you don't have to live there to go. You don't have to even be Jewish to go down and pray at the wall if you want to.
So do they have a specific time that they stop and go there and pray, or do they?
Yeah, they have.
Pray whenever you want to.
You can go anytime, but they do have specific times of prayer. In fact, you can see these figures in black down here. Those are the Hasidic Jews, that have the side curls and the black, wear the black suits and all that stuff. They try to go there, I think they're 3 times a day. They try to go to the wall and pray. I think generally, sometimes they're more, sometimes less. But yeah, they have specific times, and you'll see these guys just running down the street, trying to get there in time to do their prayer, and got all their stuff and prayer shawl and their prayer book and different things they have to have. So yeah, they have certain set times for prayer. For the really super Orthodox Jews, they're in their religion, they're a lot like us. There are varying degrees of observance of their religion. There are a lot of Jewish people in Israel that are not religious at all. They're just secular people. They really don't. They'll observe like the feasts as holidays. Family get-togethers, kind of like the way we do with holidays. But they don't really observe all the religious stuff. And then there's some people that kind of, keep it pretty well. And then you got the really ultra-Orthodox, and they're really strict about keeping all the laws and all that kind of stuff. So varying degrees of their levels of observance. And up here, there's varying, exhibits of construction over the centuries. Some of this was built back in I don't know what they call the Mamluk, is one Muslim era under a certain ruler. And then there's different time periods are represented here, and some of this up here is really not all that old. So you go from really old, like BC down here on this level of the wall, all the way up to fairly modern construction up here, and the reconstruction of that wall. Scripture, I talked about this last week, Matthew 24. Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." You'll notice I used the King James, the New King James in there. This is an old slide back when I was using the New King James. This is another shot of the street. We looked at a photo of this last week, and this street, the reason I kind of called this loosely, Jesus was here, is without a doubt a first century street right outside the wall. Okay, this wall, if you got on this wall and followed it that direction, went up over that kind of terrace type structure up there, you would go right into the western wall where they pray. It's like right over there, right on the other side of this structure here is where the western wall is. This structure is access up to the Temple Mount, but you have to be Muslim to go up there. It's really restricted access up on the Temple Mount. They allow very few non-Muslims to ever go up there. You know, you can under certain, like tours and under certain conditions you can go up there, but it's very restrictive. So anyway, but down here, this is a 1st century AD street level, right outside the temple. This structure over here supported a huge wide staircase that went from the street level, staircase up, and then turned and went up onto the Temple Mount. So this structure would have supported one of the main access ways for Jews, when Jesus was there, to go up to the temple to make their sacrifices and worship and, do the things they did at the temple. So this area, this is one place where you can be just pretty certain that at some time or another Jesus was here. He would have seen what you're looking at right now. I mean, it would have been completed and it would have been full of people and a marketplace and all kind of stuff. But he would have seen, and Peter and James and John and Paul and all those guys, they would have seen this right here, except for maybe this. This may not have been here because a lot of this is still built on backfill that filled in there over the years from destruction and construction, kind of like the tell we were talking about. You see those characteristics in these excavated areas. Okay, now you can see this big rock pile over here. And you can see this damage to this street. Well, this happened in 70 AD when the Romans destroyed the temple and all the temple structure and the porticos and all those things that were up on top of the Temple Mount. They destroyed all that and threw most of the stones off the wall down here onto the street. And they, impacted the street and tore it up. A lot of them have been moved during the excavations, but they left a lot of them there to demonstrate the debris and rubble that was left from the destruction of the temple. So, I mean, there's testament right there to one fulfillment of what Jesus said, when he said, "Not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." Well, I mean, they didn't tear down the whole Temple Mount, but the stuff that was built on top of it, they threw all that, tore it down, threw it all off. And that's the way the Romans did. See, the Romans didn't really want to go in and just conquer everybody. They wanted you to be paying them. They wanted you to be raising crops, mining, manufacturing, shipping, trading, whatever you did to make a living, they wanted you to be able to do that. But they wanted you to be paying them taxes for it. So they had ways to encourage you to do that. But if some city or some king or some leaders or some group of people decided that they were not going to pay the Romans taxes, they were not going to submit to Roman rule and all that kind of stuff, the Romans, no matter what it took, no matter how much it cost, they would come in and they would defeat you. I mean, Masada is one place that's amazing. Masada's that huge high mesa up there that, Herod had a big palace there and big fortress, Herod's fortress up on Masada. And in, I think it was 73 AD, when it was like the last Jewish holdout, were up there on Masada. And they had food, they had water cisterns and all that. They could hold out for a long time. Well, the Romans came down there and they built camps. If you were standing up on Masada and you're looking down, there's a Roman camp over there, and there's a Roman camp right over there, and there's a big Roman camp right up there. And so when they camped out, they started over here at the canyon wall kind of behind you, and they started to build a stone wall. And they built a stone wall all the way around Masada. And they had Romans stationed there, and that was the message to the people there that we're not going anywhere. We're going to stay here until we conquer you. And so then they built that big ramp going up there with the big siege stuff and all that. And you know the rest of the story about Masada. But nevertheless, that's what they did here. Because the Jewish leaders revolted and revolted and revolted against Rome to the point where Rome, Emperor Titus said, that's enough, destroy it. And so when the Romans destroyed something, they would go in and leave nothing. They would level the ground and tear everything down and totally destroy it where there was nothing left. In fact, there are places which are archaeological sites, and there aren't very many of these. But there's one or two, and I can't think of the specific name of this one place. This place is mentioned in records, in historical records. In archaeological excavations, they found the settlements that existed after it, and they found the ones that existed before it. But for that location that was mentioned in historical records, so they knew it was there, there's absolutely no sign of it. And in those historical records, what it indicates is that King so-and-so came there with his army, and he laid siege to the place, and he destroyed it. And there are places that they wiped out. They removed every stone. They removed every trace of human habitation in these places. The Romans like to do that. That's why they went to the trouble and the work to throw all these stones down and all that kind of stuff. You know, I know there's stories and legends about that. Well, all the gold in the temple melted and ran between the cracks in the rocks, and so it could be something to that. But anyway, main reason was that they did it to prove a point that you are not going to revolt against us and get away with it. We will stay here, we'll destroy you, and we'll tear down everything you ever built. So, but anyway, this is a place Jesus would have walked on this street right here. Peter and James and John and Paul and Mary and all of them, they would have been familiar with this place right here. Here's a close-up shot of a lot of these stone blocks that were thrown down there and piled up, still in the street, still there from when the Romans destroyed it. Now, I don't remember what year they excavated this Davidson Center Archaeological Park, but you know, before they excavated all this was buried. It was buried under other rubble and dirt and stuff like that that had accumulated over the years. And so they excavated all the way down, found these structures, and left those stones there. This is a stone that was found laying about right over there. And there's a replica of it still there in the location where it was found. And what is written on this stone in Hebrew is something to the effect of "to the place of trumpeting." So because the way this stone is shaped, they know that this is a stone that was right along the top of the wall on the temple or the Temple Mount. And so they're pretty sure that this stone marked the place where the priests would go out there and blow the shofar when the Sabbath was beginning, or when it was a feast day, or for whatever other reasons they blew the shofar. This stone marked, where that place was, and this fragment of stone had been broken off and thrown down there in the street. So, really interesting, artifact to find. Okay, let's talk about Bethesda. We started talking about the pools of Bethesda last week. We're in John 5. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Remember, we talked about it in the 7 feasts. There was 3 feasts of the year: Passover and unleavened bread, Pentecost, and Sukkot. That all the men were supposed to go. I think it was Sukkot. They were all supposed to go to Jerusalem. So it was at one of these feasts Jesus went up there. There is at Jerusalem by the sheep market a pool, which is called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 porches. Now, these are the ruins, or part of the ruins, of the pools of Bethesda. The reason this looks like an incredibly jumbled mass of ruins is because it's an incredibly jumbled mass of ruins. Everybody for the past 3,000 years has built some kind of structure, bathhouse, temple, shrines, you name it, having to do with a pool. They built it here. Now, if you remember in the story there about the pools of Bethesda, all these sick people gathered there because, just from the account John gives, at certain times an angel would go down in the water and stir up the water, and whoever jumped in first was healed of whatever sickness they had. Now, there's, I think we talked about this when we went through that series in John of conversations with Jesus, so I'm not going to rehash all of that tonight. I don't remember some of the details anyway, but here's one of the things. Just because it says an angel went down in the water to stir up the waters and people were healed, that doesn't necessarily mean that that was a healing from God. So, like I say, I'm not going to go all into that, but part of the reason why all of these shrines and temples to Asclepius and all of the Greek and Roman healing gods and all these things were built there is because the legend of this spring that became the pools of Bethesda, it goes way back into ancient times, and the people believed that there were spirits who lived there in that spring. Now, at certain times, according to the records that have come down, these springs would bubble at times because of fluctuations in the spring or something. Anyway, so the legend goes way back into ancient times that they had healing power. That's why all these things were built there, and they've continued to be built there, even up into like Byzantine, 2nd, 3rd, even 4th century AD. They were still building these things. In fact, I think like this column here is probably from, 4th or 5th century. They even built stuff there. Even up into, medieval times and the Crusader times, they had stuff built here and all that. So that's why it's just this jumbled mass of ruins there, and holes and cisterns and all this kind of stuff. You can see here, these structures up here, Julie Craig, you may remember some more of the details of this. I think these things are like medieval Crusader era type structures. That archway and some of this. You get on down here lower, and that's like 1st century structures and things. And then you can go down even, and some levels excavated there goes even back to like 6th and 7th century BC and so forth. It's really an archaeological exercise there, because you've got all this jumbled stuff and trying to figure out what was, who built what and when and all that. So anyway, these are the remains of what has been built on top of the stuff that Jesus would have seen. Probably very little, if any, of this you see here would have been there when Jesus was there. None of that stuff would have been there. None of this is all modern buildings up here. But here's one thing. Last time we were talking about how they got the water to the temple on the Temple Mount. And we were talking about how the Temple Mount is not the highest point of land in that area that it sits on. It's actually lower than all this. As you can see, this back here is a lot higher even than this level down here where the water pools were. So the springs that fed these water pools came from rock strata back up here, up in this higher ground back up there. And a lot of this, like this back here and that over there and some of this over here, has all been backfilled from, construction projects and stuff like that over the years. So it's kind of a hodgepodge of different time periods represented there. Now, this is standing up there looking down into what would have been one of the pools. Now, all of this massive stuff over here, this is just backfilled refuse that is washed in or been dumped in to what would have been one of those pools that were the pools of Bethesda. There were two pools. There was kind of an upper pool, and these were pretty big. And then there was the lower pool, and it was kind of odd shaped, kind of like that. And around these pools, there were like porch type, colonnaded structures around these. And that's what, we're just talking about the 5 porches and so on. And anyway, what you're looking at here in this photo would have been about right in here, probably. Best, from what I can understand from the diagrams of the excavations and everything, all of this stuff here is built right there over these filled-in pools that would have been there in Jesus' time. Out of this southern pool, there was water channels that went down to the Temple Mount, and it wouldn't have been this close, but it would have been downhill that way to the temple and everything would have been downhill from it, maybe a quarter of a mile, maybe not a long way. But anyway, the main things these pools functioned for was to supply water to the Temple Mount. And, the sheep pool around in this structure somewhere, and I think the best they could figure, they think that actually the sheep pool and the sheep market was kind of in this area here, somewhere before a lot of this stuff was built in there. I don't remember how exactly they determined that, but from reading on the material there, and a lot of it was written in French, but the best we could gather, this is where they figured the sheep pool was. But you can see how deep that is, and those pools were fairly deep in those days.
Why don't they have water in them now?
Well, if you could see it, there actually is water down here, a little bit. But the aquifers there are a lot lower than they were, back in the 1st century AD, just from usage. They use a lot of water, just like the same reason our aquifers are lower than they once were. Like over around Glen Rose, when they first settled over there, if they say you could go out there almost with a post hole digger, dig a hole in the ground, and water would gush out of it. They dug, every time they dug a well over there, it's just, water flowing out of the ground because the water level was so high. And after about, a few years, and when everybody drilling these wells everywhere, the aquifers went down, all their wells went out. So the aquifer's not as high, and the spring doesn't flow as much as it did back in Jesus' day. So it's not a usable water flow anymore, but there is a little bit of flow of water there, and enough that you can tell that's where it was and what it was, monastery or something back in the day, 3rd, 4th century, I believe. Okay. Pool slow. When he had thus spoken, and this also was when Jesus healed the blind man, he spat on the ground, made clay of the spittle, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay, and said unto him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is by interpretation sent. He went his way, therefore, and washed, and came seeing. Okay, these photos we're going to look at show the pool, or part of, the excavated part of the pool of Siloam mentioned in John 9. Even though there's no biblical indication that Jesus ever went there. It's likely that he did, but there's actually nowhere in the gospel accounts that states that Jesus ever went to the pool of Siloam. But anyway, this is part of it here. You can see those similar paving stones like we saw on that photo of the street there. This is one of the ledges where people would have walked, they would have sat, steps going down, which went down to the water level, where they could, go down there and wash and so forth. You can see some water here. There's still a little bit of water flowing in there today from the Gihon Spring, which flows through Hezekiah's tunnel. And this little pool right up here is comes from, remind me, part of the outlet of Hezekiah's tunnel in the Gihon Spring comes out right there. Again, the Gihon Spring, it flows, it's sitting there just bubbling up. You have to go down this tunnel and climb down there, and you can see it bubbling up out of its source. But it doesn't flow even like it did, back in Bible times. Here's another picture of it. Now, you'll notice the steps and some of the walkway stones here. You'll notice this over here is just kind of untouched, just ground. Grown over with a lot of weeds, and there's some of the debris and dirt and things like that. This is what it looked like before they excavated it. The reason this is still like it is and hasn't been excavated is because this property over here belongs to a Palestinian, and he would not sell it to be for excavation. He wouldn't sell it or turn it over to the Israel Antiquities authorities to let them excavate that site. So anyway, that's why that's like it is there. They found this, they found the Pool of Siloam. They had a pretty good idea of where it should be. They found it when they were excavating for a water line. And I think you can kind of see it there. It's a water line or a sewer line, I don't remember. But anyway, they were excavating for it, and they got down and they began to find these stones here. And when they found those type of stones, of course, they expected to find something. You can't kick the dirt over there without finding some kind of ruin. But when they found those, they were reasonably certain that this could be the Pool of Siloam. So they began to excavate. Sure enough, that's what it was. And so they anyway excavated this, and this was only discovered about 10 years ago. I think 2005 is when they discovered that. So without a doubt, this is the Pool of Siloam mentioned in the Gospels. It's very likely that Jesus and the apostles and so forth were very familiar with this, even went there as part of their purification rituals in preparation for Passover and the feasts and going to the temple and those kind of things. Another thing they've excavated in association with the Pool of Siloam is a set of stairs. There's a set of stairs coming down from the Temple Mount to this pool, and there's a separate set of stairs going back up to the Temple Mount from this pool. The reason was, just like the mikveh, it could accommodate a lot of people. They could go down there, wash, be purified, then go down one set of steps. They were dirty. Wash, be purified in the pool, and go back up the other steps, purified, to go to the temple and perform their rituals and ceremonies and sacrifices and things like that. Right in there, you see that tunnel structure there. These stones are part of the original walkway. If you go in that tunnel where they've excavated under all of these modern structures, that's where those steps are going up to the Temple Mount. And also there's a couple of drainage tunnels there that have been excavated. You can go through those tunnels all the way up the hill there. It's very interesting if you like that sort of thing. Another interesting factor we see here, of course, this is all solid rock. This is all solid limestone here. Up here you can see these more modern structures. All of those are built on top of the ruins of the city of David, where it talks about in the Bible the city of David, the city of Zion, and the old city of Jerusalem. All of this would have been city in Jesus' times, and all of these structures
are built on top of the ruins of probably first century Jerusalem. They may all be excavated someday, maybe not, because it's people's homes, that's where they live. But it gives this example of how that one civilization or one era is built on top of the other, and it just builds up. So anyway, Pool of Siloam. All right, now, let's talk about some of the things we were talking about last week. Let's look at a timeline here. Since we're going to be observing the Seder, or learning from the Seder, because the whole Passover and the whole Seder meal was for the purpose of education to begin with. That's what it's for. So that's what we're going to use it for. The 14th day of the first month at even is the Lord's Passover. The 15th day of the same month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread unto the Lord. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. In the first day you shall have an holy convocation. Ye shall do no servile work therein, but ye shall offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord 7 days. And the 7th day is an holy convocation. Ye shall do no servile work therein. So these are the scriptures, what we illustrate what we talked about last week about the feast. Unleavened bread and Sukkot were both 7-day feasts. First day is a Sabbath, last day is a Sabbath. Sometime in that 7 days you'll have your normal weekly Sabbath. All right. We'll look at the timeline, because our folklore doesn't match what the Bible says, oftentimes. So we want to make sure that our theology is not based on our folklore. Make sure it's based on what the Bible teaches. So let's look at some scriptures here. And they're talking about the era around about Jesus' crucifixion. There was Mary Magdalene and the other Mary sitting over against the sepulchre. Now there were 3 Marys at Jesus' crucifixion. There was Mary Magdalene, there was Jesus' mother Mary, and there was this Mary. This Mary we find over in John's Gospel. This is Mary, the wife of Cleophas. And if you remember from Luke chapter 24, where Jesus was walking, he met the 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus and talked to them and so forth. One of them was Cleophas. So Cleophas apparently one of the disciples, but that's who this Mary is. This is Mary, the wife of Cleophas. Anyway, now the next day that followed the day of preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees came together unto Pilate, saying, Sir, remember that deceiver said, while he was yet alive, after 3 days I will rise again. So the Pharisees were absolutely clear on what Jesus had said. We don't want to make any mistake about that. They weren't confused about it. They knew. And so, because of what they knew and the action they took, if Jesus' resurrection had not been real, there's no way that it would have ever gotten past these guys. Kind of like the moon shot. They say, I never went to the moon. They went out in the desert and faked all that stuff. Well, in 1969, the American people would have believed, we went to the moon. But you could have never got it past the Russians. You'd have never fooled them with it. Well, you'd never fooled the Pharisees with some fake resurrection either. Okay, the day of the preparation. That's what we find here. The Passover, the day of Passover, that is the preparation day. The preparation for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Because on the Passover, it's when they, kill the lamb and they cook it and they clean all the leaven out of their house and get all that stuff ready for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So that's what the day of preparation is. And it's significant because this is one of the details that we find in all 4 of the Gospel accounts of Jesus' crucifixion. Now, in the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. Some details there we may come back to in a minute. Okay, in Mark's account, it says, Now when the even was come, because it was the preparation, that is, the day before the Sabbath, and when the day before the Sabbath, so let's stop. I probably should have put this one on a different slide. Now, the preparation day, as we've seen, that is the day of Passover. The day before the Sabbath, this Sabbath
is not the normal weekly Sabbath. That is the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, because the preparation was to prepare for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now, here in Mark 16:1, now, it's significant that we have to remember, and this illustrates the importance of understanding right division, because the people that this was written to were Jewish people that this was written to originally. They understood all this. They didn't have to have it explained to them, the difference in the Sabbaths and all that kind of stuff. It's only us Gentiles that never learned any of this. We get confused on it because when we see Sabbath, we think it's talking all about the same thing, the normal weekly Sabbath. Because, we never went back and just simply read the instructions about the Passover. Because we, were led to believe that, that's Jewish stuff. It is not important and, all that blah, blah, blah. Replacement theology nonsense. So it says, and when the Sabbath was passed, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Salome had bought sweet spices that they might come and anoint him. Now, this Sabbath is the normal weekly Sabbath. So we're talking about the first day of unleavened bread here, which was on Thursday. And I'm going to draw a chart up here in a second. Then we'll look at it in a second, what they did between those days. And then this Sabbath was the normal weekly Saturday Sabbath. It was passed. They got there early in the morning as it began to dawn and so forth, and to anoint him with the spices. Very early in the morning, the first day of the week, they came unto the sepulchre at the rising of the sun. And they said among themselves, who shall roll away the stone from the door of the sepulchre? And when they looked, they saw that the stone was rolled away, for it was very great, a huge, big, heavy stone, and so forth. Plus it was sealed with the Roman seal. In Luke's account, it's talking about when Joseph of Arimathea went and asked Pilate for Jesus' body. He gave it to him. It says that he took it down and wrapped it in linen and laid it in a sepulchre that was hewn in stone, wherein never man before was laid. And that day was the preparation, and the Sabbath drew on. So here we find illustrated again. The preparation day was the day of Passover. And the Sabbath was the first day of unleavened bread, which was the next day, not the normal weekly Sabbath. Luke goes on. And the women also which came with him from Galilee followed after and beheld the sepulchre and how his body was laid. And they returned and prepared spices and ointments and rested the Sabbath day according to the commandment. So, this Sabbath, immediately after the day of preparation, it's the first day of unleavened bread. And this Sabbath was the normal weekly Sabbath, which was Saturday. We'd say it's Saturday. See, so on Thursday was the first day of unleavened bread, which was a Sabbath day. They didn't do any work. The next day, they, returned and prepared the spices and ointments. They did that on Friday because it wasn't any kind of a special holy day. It was during unleavened bread, but it was just a normal day. They could work on that Friday. Then they rested the Sabbath day, which was the next day, Saturday, according to the commandment, what they were supposed to do. Luke goes on in chapter 24. Now upon the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they came into the sepulchre, bringing the spices which they had prepared, and certain others with them. And they found the stone rolled away from the sepulchre. And they entered in and found not the body of the Lord Jesus. Now, let's jump over to John 19. The Jews, therefore, because it was the preparation that the body should not remain upon the cross on the Sabbath day, first day of unleavened bread. See, and this gives us our main indication. John tells, he says, for that Sabbath day was an high day. Okay, what high day was that? It would have been the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That's why it's called a high day. And that's why we have these two Sabbaths right there, only one day apart. And, if we don't understand that, then that's why we're confused. That's why we wind up with Good Friday. And that's why we wind up with all these nutty explanations of trying to get 3 days and 3 nights out of Friday and Saturday, which you cannot do. I don't care whose calendar you use or time clock or whatever. You can't do it. And it comes from, ignorance of the Scripture. The salt pie with their legs might be broken, they might be taken away. We know the rest of the story. When came to Jesus, he was already dead. They stuck the spear in his side and so forth. There laid they Jesus, therefore, because of the Jews' preparation day, for the sepulchre was nigh at hand. So they were kind of in a hurry. Sundown was coming. As soon as it got sundown, the shofar was going to blow from that point on the temple where that stone was to the place of the blowing of the trumpet and so forth. And when that trumpet blew, the Sabbath began, and if you were working, you had to drop what you were doing. So they had to get him buried before that time, sort of in a time crunch there. So sepulchre nigh at hand, and they buried him there. Very interesting discoveries that have been made about first century tombs and burial practices. Sometimes we'll go over some of that. I'll put together a deal on that sometimes. It's really interesting. Gives us some insight into all this. Now, I like this right here. This detail John gives. The first day of the week cometh Mary Magdalene early, when it was yet dark, unto the sepulchre, and seeth the stone taken away from the sepulchre. So, why do we have sunrise services? Why does our folklore say that Jesus rose at sunrise on Sunday morning? No, it didn't happen that way. Not according to the Bible, because in those other accounts we read, it says they got there very early in the morning. In fact, Matthew said, as it was beginning toward the dawn, so the sun hadn't risen yet. And John says it was still dark when they got there. And what did they find? The stone was rolled away and his body was gone. So, let's just stay right there for a second. All right. Turn the light back on because I'm done with photos. So, let's see. Here's my this is Passover. Preparation day. This is when, and I'm saying Wednesday. And this day, Jesus was crucified and buried. This day, Thursday. First day of unleavened bread. And it was a Sabbath day. As John describes it, a high day. This would have been, of course, the second day of unleavened bread. This would have been Friday. This is the day the women prepared the spices for Jesus' burial. been Saturday. Weekly Sabbath. Women rested. Alright. Sunday, and then, of course, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Sunday. Women ride before daylight. And Jesus is gone. Okay, now, this line represents night. This would have been night number 1, day number 1, night number 2, day 2, night 3, day 3. So sometime after sundown on Saturday, the Sabbath, Jesus was resurrected. We don't know what time. We don't know when exactly. All we know is the accounts we have. The soldiers that were guarding the tomb, they said, apparently they told the real account because, there were accounts of the angel. The angel came and, there was an earthquake and they fell like dead men and so forth. And they woke up and ran off and made up this cockamamie story that the disciples had stolen his body away and all that. But anyway, here's what we know. According to Jesus' own words, he would be in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. You can't get 3 days and 3 nights out of Friday and Saturday. But if you understand the proper timeline, and you understand the days of the feast, Passover and the 7-day feast of unleavened bread, this day would have been a Sabbath too. Their, feast days, like our holidays, it could start on any day of the week and adjusted, accordingly. So during that 7-day feast, you are going to have 3 Sabbath days in there, unless one of either the first or the last day just happened to fall on the normal weekly Sabbath. But anyway, you're going to have 3 Sabbath days during that feast. So Jesus crucified and buried before sundown Wednesday. First night, Wednesday night, would have been the first night that he's in the grave. Thursday was the first day of unleavened bread, the Sabbath day, the high day. That was the first day. Thursday night would have been the second night he's in the grave. Friday would have been the second day he was in the grave. On that day, the women prepared the spices and ointments for Jesus' burial and so forth. Got all that ready. Friday night would have been the third full night that he was in the grave. And Saturday, the Sabbath, when women rested, according to the commandment, would have been the third full day that he was in the grave. And so sometime after sundown Saturday, may have been toward the early part of the morning. We don't know. I guess we can ask him. Okay, Jesus, what exact time did you we can ask him when we see him. But anyway, sometime after sundown on Saturday, it was when his resurrection took place. May have been towards the early part of the morning, but it was not at sunrise. It was before sunrise. John specifically gives us those details. So, you might think, okay, what difference does all this really make? Isn't that just being kind of nitpicky about stuff and so forth? Well, I'm going to tell you why this is why this is important. Number one, because it increases our understanding of the Bible. And it gives us a more accurate understanding of biblical things. Also, don't think that the world doesn't look at our traditions and folklores and think those people are stupid. You can't get 3 days and 3 nights. Either Jesus was a liar or these dumb Christians don't know what they're talking about. Because you can't make that work, you know. And we come up with these cockamamie excuses to try to fit it all together instead of just looking at what the Bible says and following it. So anyway, that's one reason why these things are important. Above all, it gives us a clear picture of what was going on and how, when we read these details in the Gospels, we understand kind of a timeline. Now, there are people that believe this same basic thing. Their figuring of this is a little different than mine, but I believe this calendar is pretty accurate with the details we have in the Bible of what happened and when and so forth. And it's interesting, you put all this together with timeline, you can get a pretty good idea of what happened from about 6 months before Jesus' crucifixion. You can get a pretty good idea of the chronology of events that happened, and especially coming down to that last week. It's really, really pretty interesting. So anyway, I just wanted to go over that and put that up tonight so that we have a pretty good understanding of these things. Any question or discussion on any of that?
And on the sunrise thing, I always think about things 12, chapter 12 of Ezekiel, talking about God aboard people
Worshipping the sun.
Rising the sun.
Yep.
They face them east.
Yep.
To me, that should negate any kind of.
Yeah. Well, and see, that's the thing. If we don't have some understanding about pagan religious practices that have always existed, there are certain common things that you find in pretty much all pagan religious practices. And worshiping the rising sun is one of them. So that's one of the things that we have to look at in our kind of our folklore or our traditions. We have to look at those things and think, are we doing the same things that the pagans are doing, but just trying to kind of paint a Christian label on it? And if we are, we shouldn't be,
It clearly says God thinks it's an abomination that we do it.
Yeah.
How would you consider it?
Yeah. That's how Israel got in a lot of the trouble they did. They just, slipped in there incorporating things of pagan religion. And it's one of the reasons why the church at large is in the shape that it's in today. It's why it's so rife for deception and counterfeits and all of the nonsense that you see out there today. Is because we've compromised and set ourselves up to accept deceptions and counterfeits. And that's the way Satan works. He's not going to come around trying to set us on fire or poke us with a pitchfork. But he works by deception and counterfeit. He always has, he always will. And that's how he's working now. And he's been extremely effective at it, that's the whole thing about a con game. That's what makes a con game effective, is when somebody can con you and make you believe that it is the best thing in the world. Great, terrible deception and counterfeit. So, anyway.
Carson, you was talking about the Temple Mount.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been able to go in and excavate all around it, but that is holy grounds per se. And the Arabs, isn't it?
The Arabs,
The Arabs are saying no, because that would justify and prove everything that the rest of it backs up the whole Bible.
Yeah, that's why they don't want them to excavate in the Temple Mount structure itself, because they know they're going to find things that prove Israel was there 3,000 years ago.
Right.
And they can't stop that. They find, even in the back several decades ago, the Muslims went in there and excavated in the Temple Mount for a mosque underneath the surface there, kind of an underground mosque area. And they took all that fill that they dug out of there and just threw it down in the Kidron Valley, which is totally against the law. They weren't supposed to do that, but they did it anyway. So it kind of came back in their face, though, because the Israel Antiquities Authority went in there and took all that stuff, moved it across the Kidron Valley to a screening site, and they've been systematically screening those things. Well, they found a tremendous amount of very important artifacts that indicate that Israel had the Temple Mount all the way back to the first temple era, you know. And there are other things they've excavated around the Temple Mount, and even some of the, you know, the tunnels around there. And it's undeniable that Israel had their temple there, you know, all the way back to the 7th century BC. So, you know.
The rule of archaeology, you date or verify by where it was found.
Yeah.
When the Jews found it in the Kidron Valley, they didn't find it.
Yeah.
You know, they were glad to dump it somewhere else.
You lose the provenance, but they do know where it came from. You know, they do know the area, they do know that it came from the Temple Mount. So it at least has that, you know, verifiable qualification to it. So anyway, all right. Anything else? Okay, well, I hope everybody can make it next week. We always have a lot of fun with the Seder, and it's, you know, very educational. We always enjoy ourselves whenever we go through that, and I needed to kind of brush up on all that too. So hope you can come next week, and we'll have a great time with that. All right, let's pray, and we'll be dismissed.